Hi guys, I'm Broken Bexy. I'm just a girl with a broken body who wants to make a positive difference in other people's lives while trying to make the most of mine. Today I'm going to do a story time. I thought I've got some stories that I think are kind of interesting that I'd like to share, and hopefully you guys do too. But today I thought I would do one to do with like the supernatural side. I know there are a lot of skeptics out there, and if the stuff hadn't happened to me that has happened, I probably wouldn't believe in it as much. I was brought up in a Catholic home, so I'm a believer in God and angels and the devil and ghosts and all of that. But before anything had happened to me, I did question whether ghosts were a real thing, something that you could see anyway, or whether it was just this invisible being that existed. I don't really know how to describe what I believed back then. I just had a lot of beliefs that had been told to me that I took on as my own. As I've grown as a person, though, I have come to realize that I have my own beliefs, that it's just a bit different, I guess, to what I was brought up with. I still have a lot of strong beliefs with different things, and that there is a God and a devil and all of that sort of stuff still is a belief of mine. I get that not everyone believes that, and each to their own. I don't want to force my beliefs on anyone ever, but I sort of feel like the supernatural, even though there are a lot of people who don't really believe in it, there's a lot of people that do believe in it that don't necessarily believe in God and all of that. I've got a lot of different stories about all kinds of supernatural, so like ghosts, things that I can't even describe, and possession and demons and what I call the grey people. I haven't ever heard anyone else refer to anything as the grey people before, so I don't know if anyone's really going to understand what I'm talking about when I talk about that. But today I thought I would just go into a bit of my first kind of experiences. There's a few of them, but there's not big stories behind them to make up like a proper video or anything. So I thought I'd just put them all together and explain them a little bit. So the first story I have, I can't really describe it. It's a hard one to describe. I don't know what it was. It could have been something that could be easily explained away, but I haven't been able to find a way to explain it, so I don't. Yeah, but it wasn't necessarily like a ghost or anything. And then when I've friends of mine or different people that I've met as I've grown up, I haven't told them about this story, but then they've told me stories very similar to it. This is kind of like, I'll try and describe it. So when I was about 6 or 7, I was still really young. I had just moved my room around, so I don't know if you guys ever enjoyed doing that, but I really enjoyed moving my room around at different times. So like putting my bed in a different place in the room and like cupboards and stuff in another spot. Anyway, I'd just done this. It was probably one of the first couple of times that I'd done it, because I'd just gotten big enough to like try and move my stuff by myself. And I remember laying down, going to bed, and then I woke up and I had this really heavy feeling all over. And I think this is probably the first time that I experienced some sort of sleep paralysis. So my body just felt so heavy and I didn't know what was going on, but like I knew I was awake and my eyes were open. And so my room had a door on one side that went to the living room, kitchen area, and then I had another door on the opposite side, like it was all on one sort of wall, that went to my parents' bedroom, and the rest of the room sort of stuck out this way, so there wasn't much room on the other side to the wall between the walkway, and everyone used it as a walkway, so that's what I've always referred it to. But I had my bed sticking out in the middle, and I just moved it. I can't remember where it was before that, but it kind of, because I just moved my room around, kind of made things harder for me later on in the story. So when I'd woken up and I felt like I couldn't move my body, all I could do was look around the room, and I saw coming from my parents' door these two bright red eyes, and I didn't know what it was, and it was like this tall, shadowy figure, and the way it was standing was really weird. It was like hunched over, but it didn't really look like a person just hunched over. It kind of looked like, as crazy as it sounds, like a massive dog when they stand up, but then it sort of had like a human or like a person's look as well. It was sort of like a mixture of the two, and it was sort of like in a cloak kind of. It looked a bit like a cloak, or like something was over it, and it had this big stick as well, and it was just slowly moving from that side of the room just closer and closer to my bed, and I couldn't do anything. I was just frozen there, and all I could do was look. I couldn't even yell out. And then for like a split second I felt like I could move, so I jumped up just before it got to the bed and ran for my door, but because I'd moved my room, the door wasn't where I thought it was, so I was so used to the door being so close or in a certain direction from my bed, but because I'd moved it, it was in a different direction from my bed, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't, but that's the best way I can explain it. Anyway, I jumped up and ran for where I thought the door was and ran straight into the wall. And we didn't have like normal like plasterboards for our walls. It was a really old house, and it was really weird, but it had cement walls, like concrete walls. They had put wire up, and I'm guessing wood inside it, and then just packed on all this like cement onto it, so it was like all bubbly and very, very, very solid, and it hurt a lot running into it. And my dad, or my mum, I think it was dad, he heard it, and he came running into the room to see what had happened and turned the light on, and I couldn't see this creature anymore, but I was freaked out by it, and I don't know where it went or what happened, but I know that like I felt like I'd seen it, and Dad just tried to say, oh, you just been like having a dream and you sleepwalk and all of that, because I did tend to sleepwalk, but I never knew what I was doing when I was sleepwalking. Like I'd get told stories of that I'd been out walking in the yard, or I'd been like hiding somewhere, but I'd never remember what I'd done. I only would remember what I'd been told I had done. And then, but yeah, Dad said there's nothing in the room, and then I didn't see anything of that again. But then later on, I met a friend, and she almost described the same thing. She said she saw like, it was big, like the size of a man or a small bear, but it was like half man, half dog shaped, and it had two bright red eyes, and that's how she described it to me. And we're in the middle of nowhere. Her mum's house was like ages away from any other houses, and we'd gone for a walk. It was late at night and we'd gotten bored, so we decided to go for a walk, and we'd gotten a fair way away from the house, and then we started talking about this story and we freaked ourselves out. And so we started heading back to the house, and then we got freaked out that every noise we heard, this thing was coming for us. But as soon as she described it to me, I described what happened to me, and she said like that was exactly the same thing that used to haunt her when she was a kid. It would happen, like she'd see it randomly at these random places and all this sort of stuff, and it was just such a creepy feeling when we're talking about it, that it had happened to somebody else. But that was my first sort of encounter with this thing. And this could also be linked to something else that I'm going to do a different story time on, because it is really full on. So this house that we were living in, we moved into when I was really young. We lived there for about 8 years, and when we moved in, my parents had to do a lot of work on the house because there was spray painted satanic signs on the walls. There was flea infested carpets. The house was one too small for our house, but it was really run down and hadn't been looked after by the previous owner. So they like redid the carpets, redid the paint, enclosed the carport, built in the shed that we had to make more rooms and stuff for, because we had a big family. But there's lots of things that sort of started happening at that house that have sort of carried on from life, that we have our own theories about, like my siblings and I. But there's one big aspect that I need to do a whole other story time on, because there's too much and it's a lot to talk about. So the second story is, it didn't happen to me, but it happened to my family member, but it sort of made me more aware of ghosts and stuff. Like I said, this house was kind of had a lot of history, I guess you could say. So we knew that we'd heard that years ago, maybe, I don't know, a long time ago, like 20 years or something, a little boy had drowned in the dam at the back of the property. We had 20 acres, so a lot of room to run around and have animals and all that sort of stuff, but it had a big dam at the back, and a little boy had drowned in it. And my brother, when he was about like early teens, and our older siblings had moved away, we had 3 bedrooms and a bathroom in our shed that was like away from the house. It would have been like, 100 meters away from the house, and he was staying up in one of the rooms, and he kept getting up, us younger siblings, because he thought we were going into his room when he wasn't there, and we were moving things around. So he started like setting up little like traps and stuff, so like if someone went into the room, he'd have strings set up so that like if someone went in, the strings would break or they'd move something or whatever, and he would lock the door and all of that. But we all like use a knife in the door and open it up. We didn't really understand boundaries or personal space or anything back then. And he was always getting up us for moving this stuff, and he like once he realized that it wasn't us that were doing like moving his things around, he'd be like, look at this, and he'd put something down that he knew would always get touched, and then we'd go out of the room and we'd wait a few minutes, and then we'd go back into the room, and that like a piece of paper or whatever it was would always be moved. And I remember like seeing that and just being so scared, and he was convinced that it was the little boy who had drowned in the dam. And so he like tried communicating with him and all that sort of stuff, but I can't remember if he actually did or not. But that was sort of like the first time that, like, even though I'd had this thing with the red eyes happen, like, it wasn't the same. I was freaked out by it, but it wasn't like a ghost. I didn't feel like it was a ghost, but this was. So that sort of was like the first thing that we noticed. And then I don't think anything else happened. I can't really remember any supernatural stuff happening after that. But we moved towns, and we had this, again, because we had a big family, we had our house, but my parents also bought a donga. So basically what a donga is, it's a portable room. So they're this shed type thing that is being built in like a room. And I know in Australia they have them as temporary classrooms a lot, and temporary work offices and different things like that, but we had it as 2 bedrooms. And so my brothers used to stay in there, and I remember my brother telling me once that he woke up and saw a little girl standing at the end of his bed. And my other brother, he used to wake up hearing this child calling out, "Mummy, mummy, help me, mummy, help me," and like with a real like urgency and terror in his voice, or her voice. He always thought it was a little boy, but kids' voices can sometimes sound like they're hard to tell if it's a boy or a girl sometimes. So but I hadn't heard or seen anything like that before. And then a couple of years after he had stopped mentioning that he'd been hearing this, because he'd hear it quite often, I was living in the house, and my room was right next to my younger brother's, and we had been sent to bed, and I was allowed to stay up reading a book or listening to music or whatever, and my younger brother had gone to sleep, and my older brothers had gone off to their rooms over in the donga. And I hear this, "Mom, Mom, help, Mom," and just like this yelling out, and it sounded close, but it also kind of sounded like it was far away. And I was like, oh, why is my little brother calling out and asking for help, and why isn't Mum going to him? And so I come out of the room, and I asked my mum, like, is he okay? Like, what was wrong? And she's like, what are you talking about? And I said, I don't want to say my siblings' names and stuff in case they don't want to be mentioned on the internet and stuff, but I was like, oh, is D okay? He was calling out to you. And she's like, I didn't hear anything. And I was like, oh, okay. And I'd looked at the TV, and I was Mum wasn't watching a show that like would have that kind of thing calling out or anything like that, not in the way that I had heard it. And I went into my room, and I was like, oh no, before I went there, I like asked her, I'm like, oh, was anyone calling out on the TV? And she's like, no. And I'm like, no one was calling out for help, no one was saying mum. And she's like, no one was asking for help or calling out. Like, I haven't heard anything like that, whether it's from your little brother or from the TV show. So I walked back towards the rooms, and I checked in on my little brother, and he was fast asleep. And I went back into my room, laid down, and about 15 minutes later I hear it again. Calling out for mum and calling out for help. And I went into my brother's room, and he was still fast asleep. And I waited for a couple of minutes to see if he was sleep talking or whatever, like he hadn't done it before, but like I thought maybe he was sleep talking or something like that. And he didn't. So I walked out to mum, and I was like, was anyone on the TV calling out for help? She's like, no. And I'm like, well, what about D? Did D call out? She's like, no, I haven't heard any calling out. What is going on? Why do you keep asking me this? And I said, I've been hearing someone calling out for help and calling out to mum. And I thought it was D. I thought he was calling out for help. And she's like, no, I haven't heard anything. Just go back to bed. Everything's fine. If you're worried, say a prayer. And then went back to bed. And then I heard it again, walked out, checked on my brother. He was fine, fast asleep. And then I just decided I was going to go back to bed and not worry mum anymore. And that was it. So then the next day I asked my little brother about it, and he was like, no, I didn't call for help or wasn't calling out. I slept. I don't remember waking up. And then I asked my mum, and she said, no, nothing happened. It was kind of weird that you were saying that, but you know, your older brother has heard these things from his room, and maybe it's the same thing. And that was pretty much it. I heard it a couple more times after that, like months or years later, but just sort of learnt to ignore it because there wasn't really anything we could do. My older brother had heard it quite a few times, and my other older brother, who was in the other room, heard it as well. And just little things like I'd be sitting on the couch and I'd feel someone touch my hair, and the rest of my family would be in a different section of the house, and they wouldn't have come anywhere near me for it to possibly be them, or I'd feel them tugging on something or whatever. Another story was, I was a bit older. I was about 16, and my two older brothers and their girlfriends had gone up our paddock to collect firewood because we were having a bonfire that night, and my younger brother and I had gone down to the front of the house in the gardens and everything to have find what we could. And we had 3 acres at that time, so we were at the very front, and my older brothers and their girlfriends were at the very top. So we were about 3 meters away from 3 acres away from each other. And I hear this, my younger brother and I hear this noise, and we hear, it sounds like someone's calling to me, and my family all called me Becky back then, and they were like, all I could hear was Becky, Becky, help, Becky, help, just screaming at us, like echoing. And so both of us immediately dropped everything we had and went running up our paddock to go and see what was going on, because it sounded like it was my brother's girlfriend who was calling out to us. And as we were running up the paddock, we saw the four of them running down the paddock towards us, going, "What's going on? What's going on?" And what had happened was, at the same time that we had heard that, they had heard me calling out one of the girlfriend's names for help, saying, help me, like, come and help me. And so they had started running to come and find us, because they thought I was calling out for help. And when we got to each other, we were like, "No, I wasn't calling out for help. We thought you were." And then they were like, "Were you? We thought you were calling out." And we couldn't work out what was going on. And where we were living, everyone lived on property. So like, there was just a man that lived next door in the closest house to us. And we're like, well, it wasn't him, because it was definitely a girl's voice, but it sounded like they were saying my name or the girlfriend's name. And we're like, well, maybe it was one of the other properties. And so we went walking around and we were asking different people if there was anyone that was calling out for help, and no one had heard a single thing. And so we just didn't, there wasn't much more we could do about it, but we were just like, it was such a weird feeling, I think, having this called out for help. And we sort of figured maybe it's this person that keeps calling out to Mum for help. Maybe they have learnt our names and are calling out our names to try and get help now, or something like that. And my mum has also heard someone calling out for help as well at this same house. We live across the road from a creek, and when it rains a lot, it floods. And during the floods, Mum heard a man calling out for help. "Somebody help me, help me, help me." And she called the SES, which is the is a volunteer emergency services group, and they help like police and ambulance and fire brigades and stuff, like in emergencies, obviously. And Mum called them up and was like, "I think someone's stuck in the creek in the flood waters." So they had people come out. They couldn't find anyone. They had so many different emergency services. Like, they had a helicopter, they had boats, they had diving teams, they had people everywhere searching for this man that was calling out for help, and they could not find him anywhere. So either it was somebody that unfortunately got swept away in the water, or it wasn't anyone at all. There was no reports of people missing or people who might have drowned or anything around that time either. So we're kind of leaning more towards someone, that it wasn't actually a someone per se, but just one of these people that we keep hearing. Another story was from when I was staying at my brother's girlfriend's cousin's place. We were traveling to go visit my sister, and we broke the trip up. It was a 9-hour trip, and we decided to break the trip up so my brother's girlfriend could see some of her family on the way to go and see our family. And I decided I was going to bed because we wanted to get up early and the next morning, and I don't do mornings very well. So I went to bed, and I could hear everyone out in the room just outside, because it was like a living area just outside this room. And next thing, I'm trying to go to sleep, and I can hear them all laughing outside and everything. And then next thing, I feel the blanket being pulled off me, and it starts getting pulled off. Like, I can feel the hands like grabbing at it on my stomach and pulling it off, and it was almost all off. And I pulled it back on, and then it got pulled off again, and I pulled it back on, and it pulled it off again. And I was like, what is going on? And I was like, did someone like sneak in here and is grabbing it, or is there legitimately like something else in here with me, and went out and asked everyone. No one had gone into the room. No one knew what was going on. Her cousin, the girlfriend's cousin, thought I was going a bit crazy because he wasn't a believer in the supernatural or ghosts or anything like that. And then I think the last story I'll tell tonight is I was living with my sister, and so I was living in this room, and I'd get this feeling from time to time that something was in there with me, just this unsettling feeling that I was alone and that something wasn't quite right. And it wouldn't happen all the time or anything. It was just this feeling like someone was right beside me. And I remember watching the Paranormal Activity movies. I think it was like when there was only 2 of them, and my sister and I had watched both of them together, and then I went to bed and I could just feel it so strongly, and it was probably all in my head from watching the movies, and I let it get to me, and I ended up sleeping in the bed with her because I was just freaked out. But I just felt like something was there, and because of the past experiences of feeling like something was in the room with me, made me uncomfortable. But then a few weeks later, my brothers came to visit, and one of my brothers was sleeping in my room instead, and I had actually just moved out in with a friend, and so that room was like a spare room for people to stay in, and so my brother was sleeping in there, and he said he was on his phone and he was just scrolling through Facebook or whatever it was, and he felt his phone tug in his hands, and then he was like, oh, what? And then it tugged again, and it tugged again, and he kept trying to hold on to it, and then it tugged a few more times and then ripped it out of his hands, and it like went flying. Not far, not like flying, but it fell out of his hands, like he had sort of half thrown it across out of the bed, and he picked it up again and then tug, and he just said, go away, leave it alone, and then it just stopped. So yeah, someone out there is probably going to be able to explain all of these away as not being anything paranormal or anything like that, and honestly, I want to hear it. I want to hear what theories you have on what this could be, or whether this has made you think that maybe there are supernatural beings out there or ghosts or whatever, because like I said, I've got a lot of experiences and it kind of makes me desensitized to it in a way. So these are just like, to me, feel like normal things that just happen, whereas other people might see it and go, okay, that is seriously creepy, why are you scared of this? None of these things that have happened have made me have felt like it's something to be really scared of. It's freaked me out at times, but I've sort of feel like if something was going to hurt me, they would have done something to hurt me, which I have also experienced. So with what I like to call the demon, like, it has tried to hurt me, and it feels evil, and it feels like it wants to cause havoc and pain, whereas these things, they never felt like I was in any harm's way, or like it wanted revenge or to hurt anyone or cause harm or any kind of havoc. It just felt like these were just lost souls looking for help, I guess. So I don't really know if these are creepy stories or if they're just whatever stories. Make sure to let me know, because I don't really know how to judge them anymore. But yeah, if you do have a way of explaining these things to me in a way that proves it's not a ghost or some other being, I really want to hear it, because I haven't been able to make sense of it, and other people that I've spoken to haven't been able to make sense of it. So yeah, I want to hear it, whatever you think of these stories, especially if you want to hear more of these, because I do have quite a few stories from my childhood, and more like paranormal ones, I guess, ones that are harder to explain and harder to make sense of. But definitely let me know if you have any experiences like this as well. Like, they always intrigue me, these kind of stories, and I'm always watching them on YouTube, all these like paranormal things, and scary movies interest me, and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, if you want to see more videos from me, make sure to press the subscribe button here and turn on the notification bell so that you don't miss it when I do post. Make sure you give this a thumbs up if you did like the video, and let me know down below what you thought of it, and if you've got any other suggestions. Bye.